Hello and welcome to Technically Speaking, where scientists and engineers come together to chat about a common interest, share knowledge and satisfy some curiosity. I'm Ellie and I'm joined by Jasmin to talk about mining on the moon.
Yeah, mining on the moon.
So Jasmin, this was your idea initially. How come you came across this idea?
Yeah, so I was at a conference and they were running a workshop and I can't remember what the discussion we were talking about, but someone in the group I was in mentioned mining on the moon and I thought, that sounds really cool. And then a few months later, I heard about mining on the moon in another podcast because it was in the news at the time. But yeah, it's an interesting concept. I mean, why not? The moon's basically chemically the same, or maybe not chemically the same, but like it's very similar to the Earth in that the moon came from the Earth.
Yes, that's interesting. That's a fair point. So this is going to be a little bit different. We're going to do this episode a bit like Dragon's Den or Shark Tank, if you're in America. And Jasmin is going to be the pitcher, and she's going to convince me, the dragon, that mining on the moon is a good idea. So we're going to talk pros and cons of mining on the moon. So I think we better start as to why we even have this idea in the first place.
Yeah, so mining on the moon. So the moon basically has the same elements and materials that are on Earth because millions and billions of years ago, the moon was basically came from the Earth. So there's lots of different metals, materials that are on the moon that could be very valuable, specifically for like technologies. So there's three particular things that people are interested specifically from getting from the moon. One of the things is helium-3. It's a isotope of helium that's not naturally occurring on Earth because the Earth has a nice ozone layer that protects us from solar radiation, whereas the moon doesn't have this, so it's been constantly exposed for billions and billions of years. So it has a lot more helium-3 than we do on Earth. It's not naturally occurring. We get it from nuclear reactors.
Oh.
So the only way to scale up production of helium-3 on Earth would basically be to have more nuclear reactors.
Which could happen.
But if you can, yeah, which could happen. But why would you need that if you can mine it from the moon? Yeah. Fewer concerns about nuclear proliferation, for example. The other two materials that people are interested in getting from the moon are rare earth metals, so like scandium, yttrium, these types of metals that are used in electronics like smartphones because they have very specific properties. I'm not going to go into more details on those because there was a previous episode that we did that talked about different materials that get used in technologies. But yeah, lots of precious rare earth metals could be very valuable. And the other thing is water. So in 2020, data from NASA's SOFIA mission confirmed the existence of water on the lunar surface.
Right.
The water molecules, they're embedded to grains of lunar dust. And
okay, so it's not like a big stream.
No.
There's no like actual running water or like a big lake or anything like that on the moon.
No, but there is water in dust.
Okay, that sounds complicated, but I'm willing to bear with it.
Yeah.
Okay, so we could mine helium-3, which we can't get unless we get it from nuclear reactors.
Yep.
We could get these rare, precious earth metals, which presumably we can also get from Earth and are currently getting from Earth.
Yeah, but there's issues in where they're located, and also they're pretty rare because they're called rare earth metals.
For a reason.
Yeah.
Absolutely. But they are presumably more abundant on the moon.
We're not entirely sure about whether or not they're more abundant on the moon versus on Earth. Just based on size, probably there's more on Earth. It's just that we've probably extracted a good fair amount of our existing rare earth metal stock. And we're running out because we're not good at recycling electronics. So
That is very true.
We need to get it from the moon.
You need to get it from the moon. And then presumably also, in theory, we could extract the water molecules from lunar dust and then get water from the moon.
Yeah, we can, because from our previous episode, which was about forever chemicals, basically nearly all the water on the Earth is contaminated with chemicals. So if we need like pure water that's not contaminated, we can get it from the moon.
You can get it from the moon. Interesting. Okay, you've piqued my interest. I'm intrigued.
Good.
But I am imagining that this is not going to be easy.
No. So currently, there is nothing on the moon. There might be some like junk left behind from the one mission where humans landed on the moon, and I don't think there's anything else that's been left on the moon. All the other rovers, they basically just like they land, and if they're successful, they'll take some measurements, and then they go back to the Earth. I think, maybe they're just
still there.
Still there? Oh, okay.
I think they leave. What? I'm not 100% sure for every single one, but I think a lot of little, if there are rovers and robots, I think probably they're still there.
Okay. Then
and also I think we did 4 or 5 trips to the moon in like the 60s. So there is some like paraphernalia left over from when people went to the moon.
Yeah.
Including a bag of Neil Armstrong's poop. So maybe I could flog that to the highest bidder.
Yeah, I'm sure there's like some space fanatic who'd probably pay lots of money for it.
Okay, regardless of perhaps leftover bits and pieces, given that there is no infrastructure, this is presumably going to be one of the biggest costs in mining from the moon, is going to be some sort of, I don't know, plant or rig or industry-sized building to get the resources going.
Yeah, so to get mining on the moon to work, you need to actually build mining infrastructure. So you need to get all the equipment to the lunar surface. So everything you need to drill and take samples to establish where you want to be digging into to extract whatever you're trying to extract. Then you need to like scale it all up so that you can extract large amounts. But then you also need something that will then transport it back to Earth. Or maybe like some processing stuff if you want to do processing on the moon rather than on the Earth. But you also need people, potentially you might need people living on the moon.
Yeah.
Mining usually involves a lot of people. So you might need actual miners on the moon. Although we could use robots.
I was just going to ask you that. Do you think that would be possible to do it solely remotely controlled, I guess, from Earth? And then presumably that would be cheaper, right? It's got to be cheaper sending a lot of robots up there than it has sending people.
Yeah, potentially. If we can develop a robot that could do all the things that we would need a human to do. But yeah, it's regardless of whether or not we use robots or humans to do the actual mining, it's going to be expensive. It's going to cost minimum billions, potentially quadrillions of US dollars, euros, pounds, whatever currency you want to use. It's going to cost a lot of money.
Yeah, because we were saying before about the cost of going into space for we just watched the SpaceX mission with the billionaires that opened the hatch and had a little civilian spacewalk for the first time.
Yeah.
That is an expensive process just to do that. So without any sort of, physical gathering of resources. So yeah, it's definitely going to have a huge overhead cost in the first place.
Yeah, definitely. But if you could successfully extract all these resources from the moon, then you could make billions to quadrillions in money because the materials, specifically the helium-3 and the rare earth metals, they're really valuable. So per kilogram or gram, they're worth hundreds to thousands of dollars. So you could potentially make lots of money if you could get mining on the moon to work.
And presumably someone has to be the first, right? So maybe there's something to be said for the huge outlay of costs in the beginning to set up the infrastructure, set up the people that live there or spend a lot of time there, to set up the robots. And then you could start raking in the reward once you're generating product.
Yeah, for sure. You definitely could. It could also be a way of, there's no way of saying it without saying it, but, setting up colonies on the moon as well, if you did want to, have people living on the moon. It's a way of, getting people there so that they could also, have jobs. In addition to, scientists doing research, you could have researchers on the moon and also people mining on the moon.
Yeah. absolutely. However, I feel perhaps that we need to consider some risks to this.
Yeah.
Because the moon, not particularly a safe place, given what you said about the Earth having an atmosphere. And there's a lot of things to contend with on the moon, like the dark and the cold and the radiation.
Yeah.
So anything that we send up there has got to be dark, cold, radiation proof, and also able to operate in very low gravity.
Yeah, I mean, that also adds into why it's going to cost lots of money, because the equipment and all the facilities that you would need to set up there, they need to be resistant or able to cope with the really harsh conditions on the moon.
Yeah.
So basically all the stuff that you would need for mining on Earth, but just like make it extra, like super like hard and resilient.
Which is then presumably going to weigh more. So I'm going to need a really big spaceship to get it to the moon in the first place.
Yeah, way more, slightly different compositions and materials. I mean, you also need to actually like build buildings on the moon. So whether or not you're going to like build whole buildings and then ship that to the moon as whole pieces, or flat pack it like IKEA furniture and then ship it to the moon, because you can do that with houses.
That is true. But I think that might be a long way off. The technology to flat pack mining equipment, ship it to the moon with someone who can then assemble it at the other end in low gravity. Seems like a lot of steps.
Yeah, and it's also like the risks just associated with launching space rockets to get to the moon, because the safety record's a lot better now, but there's still risk of unsuccessful launches.
Yes, absolutely. Quite dangerous, quite risky is what I'm getting from this. And also, can I even really do it in the first place?
Yeah, that is a really good question. Okay, so technically, there was a 1979 moon agreement, which basically set out that no country or nation can have sovereignty of the moon, i.e. they can't actually like own bits of the moon.
Yeah.
But it hasn't actually been ratified or signed by any major world power. So in theory, no, you cannot mine on the moon or claim ownership on any resources of the moon. But at the same time, the people who do have the capacity to go to the moon and start mining, they haven't actually agreed to this officially. So
right.
They could mine
so
on
it's
the
a
moon.
little bit of a loophole in this agreement then, perhaps.
Yeah, a bit of a loophole. Yeah, it's interesting that they didn't actually sign it.
Yes, that is interesting, because with the civilian spacewalk, the Americans said way back when they signed the treaties and things like that, that space was for everyone, but they wanted private companies to be able to go to space if that was their wish. It didn't have to be like a ESA, NASA, the Russian one situation.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, because we got SpaceX, they're the main one who are commercial.
Yeah.
And yeah, I'm sure there are others who are going to be looking into trying to commercialize space travel.
Absolutely.
Or even things to get stuff into space, because I know there are private companies who launch satellites.
Yeah, absolutely. So then why couldn't we have a private company mining on the moon? And also, presumably, the world or industry would very much want the metals and the helium-3 isotopes. So if I was, effectively a business providing that resource, then I'm going to have customers. It's going to be for the benefit of industry to buy those materials from me, which we didn't have before. So really, I'm doing the world a favour.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there are lots of resources on the moon that are really important in terms of decarbonisation and advancing technology. And yeah, so we kind of need these materials because the Earth could run out, so we need to get them from other places.
Do we have to be also not conscious? Because a lot of the problems that come from mining on Earth is destruction of habitats and pollution of rivers and all of that sort of negative connotations. People are very exploited sometimes in the mining industry. But on the moon, nothing's living on the moon. So I'm not destroying anyone's habitat because nothing lives there. There are no rivers to pollute, even though there is water, as we now know. But there's no negative environmental impact necessarily of mining the moon directly. There potentially could be more of an environmental impact on Earth if I'm sending up 25 space rockets every month to get my resources there and back.
Yeah, that's a really, really good point, because if you're mining on the moon, you avoid or you eliminate certain issues that are so really highly associated with mining on Earth. So most of the environmental and social issues are pretty much eliminated because there's no one living on the moon. There's no real ecosystem.
Yeah.
So pollution, environmental damage, pretty much eliminated because there's not much on the moon.
And also, presumably, I'm not going to have to go that deep, am I, to get different materials? I'm not going to be changing. You're not going to look at the moon and see me having, made it 3/4 of a sphere. I'm not going to be carving out giant sections. Or maybe I am. Maybe I'll be sending diggers to the moon.
I mean, that is something that we may need to send to the moon, depending on how we're going to try to extract stuff. So, with the water, that's attached to the lunar dust, so we would need to scoop up the lunar dust and then process that. But for the other materials, I think might also be similar for helium-3, because that's just from the moon's surface being bombarded with solar radiation.
But how do I extract helium-3? What do I need?
That is a really good question. I don't think anyone actually knows that because we haven't done it yet. We just know it's there.
We know it's possible in theory. I need to develop some new technologies then if I'm going to be getting the helium-3 from the moon.
Yep. Same with the water because it's in the lunar dust. But for the rare earth metals, it'll be very similar to how we extract it on Earth. We just dig for the ores.
Dig for the ores. Okay, perfect. So potentially I would need a lot of resources. This is basically what it comes down to, is that because there is no infrastructure for this in place, regardless if the world would let me do it as a private company, it's all about getting the stuff to the moon, setting up some kind of plant or rig or big drill, and then getting the stuff home. Those are the main 3 issues.
Yeah.
And that is going to cost an awful lot of time and resources and cash.
Yep, it's going to cost a lot of money, but there's already a company looking into it. So there's a startup who are already looking into whether or not they can harvest the resources from the moon.
Right.
As far as I'm aware, that it's only one, but we could see more, especially if more people become aware of it and become interested in mining on the moon.
Yeah, absolutely. I could see, think of SpaceX didn't exist, 50 years ago? And now it's sending its own astronauts, civilians, whatever you want to call them, into space. So
yeah, sending tourists into space. Yeah,
if we've got space tourism, I feel like really mining the moon for resources probably isn't that far away in the grand scheme of things.
Yeah. And then we could maybe even then move on to mining on other planets or moons of other planets, because they also have resources. Isn't there is there a moon that apparently rains diamonds?
Yes, so this is really interesting, and I have my notes somewhere. So on Saturn, it occasionally rains diamonds. Isn't that absolutely wild? And potentially also on Uranus and Neptune, but they're obviously further away. So imagine if you could go there and collect diamonds because of the incredible pressure that these atmospheres of these planets.
Yeah, that would be really cool. It would sound to be, if you were caught in a diamond hailstorm, be very painful.
Incredibly hard hail.
Yeah, just your umbrella would be have holes within a few seconds because diamonds are so hard and sharp.
Isn't that? I think it would be technically impossible because of the extreme atmospheric pressure. So you would never really be able to harness it because everything would just be crushed. But if we could figure it out, we could make an absolute fortune.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we could also, it's not just other planets and other moons of other planets that potentially have resources that humanity would be interested in mining. There's also asteroids that could be very valuable.
Yes.
There's an asteroid called Psyche, and it's apparently laden with so many precious metals that people have estimated it's worth $10,000 quadrillion.
Whoa.
That's just for the precious metals that's in this big asteroid. So, yeah, potentially lots of very valuable resources and lots of money to be made from mining, not just on the moon, but other things are in space.
Yeah, I think that's definitely a really interesting question about how we could, I wasn't going to say exploit, but how we could use things in space for us. Because Psyche, like you said, is a gold mine. Like, it's full of elements that we use every day. And unfortunately, we are, running out of things on Earth. So why not turn to space and start mining things like that? It really reminds me of that Netflix TV show, and I can't remember what it was called, but they were mining ice, and a lot of the show was based around mining ice and shipping ice back, because they all needed water. They all lived in space by this point. But like, water was the most precious resource, and so they were mining ice and shipping it across the cosmos. It was very good. I can't remember what it was called.
Yeah. I mean, there is water on the moon. We could end up having to mine it from the moon because we've contaminated all of our water.
I mean, that is a depressing thought, and I'm all for saving Earth's resources and recycling and reducing our environmental impact, which we should definitely do, but potentially a good source of materials on the moon. And I don't think, though it could go either way, that we would then damage the moon enough to start messing with the tides. Presumably that wouldn't be a thing.
That would be a very big... That would be like very significant thing to do if you could alter the moon so much that it actually impacts the tides. Because that would mean you reduce the mass of the moon by quite a bit.
Yeah, but if we're mining all the stuff, then maybe we are reducing its mass.
Yeah, potentially.
We'd have to reduce it pretty significantly though, wouldn't we?
Yeah, I'd have to reduce it by quite a lot. But yeah, I mean...
Then we'd be putting stuff back. Maybe we could, start swapping things to keep the moon in the right mass.
Be like, not quite like Futurama, but we start putting all our trash on the moon.
Yeah, I was just going to say trash, like rubbish. Start shipping that back to the moon.
Yep.
So how about if you had all the money and all the resources, would you do it? Would you go for moon mining as a thing?
I would go for moon mining, but probably not for water, but probably for the helium-3, just because that seems to be where all the big bucks are right now.
Yeah, that's an interesting point, because you said they were used for like cooling supercomputers, right?
Yeah, so helium-3, it's got really useful properties. So that one of the properties is that you can like cool it down to really, really close to absolute zero, and that's really useful in quantum computers. So quantum computers are basically supercomputers, but better, faster. But because they are better and faster than supercomputers and even regular computers, they get really hot. So you need much better coolants for them so that they can like stay cool and operate and don't die. So yeah, helium-3 seems to be the demand for it. Interestingly, prior to like the 2000s, when people wanted to use helium-3 for supercomputers, people wanted to use helium-3 for nuclear fusion.
Oh, you said we got it from nuclear reactions.
Yeah, but that's... Okay, Laura's probably gonna kill me. But it's fission, right? Is it fission? Yeah, it's fission where it splits into one or two smaller nuclei.
Yes.
Yeah, so they want to use it for fusion.
Which is joining.
Which is joining. And according to most nuclear scientists, regardless of like what decade you ask them, they will always say, it's going to happen in the next 50 years. We're always 50 years away from it, and that 50-year marker just moves further and further away.
Yeah. That's interesting. So we could see it. I think it's not such a ridiculous concept. You know, when people say, oh, mining on the moon, it seems very out there, very far away. But I'm leaning towards it, to be honest. I could see a lot of benefits potentially from mining on the moon.
Excellent. I've convinced you to invest quadrillions, if not billions of dollars into
billions
my
of quadrillions.
Hypothetical startup that's going to extract helium-3 from the moon.
I think we might face a little bit of international outrage if we start our own company.
Yeah, for sure.
So we might have to hire some very good lawyers to make sure that we don't get sued for all that we're worth.
Yeah, but what we can do is, because there's already one startup who wants to explore mining on the moon, we can see what they do, and whatever mistakes they make, we learn from those mistakes.
We learn from those mistakes.
Stuff that they do well, we also learn from that.
And beat them to the punch and get there first.
Yeah.
I do wonder if this is where it's going to go. But I think we're a little way out. If it was in our lifetime, I would be surprised.
Yeah. I mean, we could potentially see it in our lifetime. I mean, we already have not moon tourism, but space tourism.
Yes, so true.
So probably, and I know that other space agencies are interested in sending people to the moon because there hasn't been another person actually on the moon since Neil Armstrong.
Since the 60s, at least.
Yeah.
There was people always moon mission. Who was the last person on the moon? Because I don't think it was Neil.
Was it? No, I thought, because we always talk about we're going to send someone else to the moon, but then we never do.
Yeah, I think NASA is looking at a mission at the moment. The Artemis missions are like they're like return to the moon missions, which they're in various phases of. But according to Google,
I take it back.
Yeah, the last person on the moon.
There have been 24 people who all made the journey.
The first person to walk on the moon was Neil Armstrong, but the last person to walk on the moon was Eugene Cernan, that was in 1972. Yeah. So I think it's time. I think it was time we got someone back on the moon. Let's give them a big old spade. They can send us some good old rare earth elements, and let's make some cold hard cash.
Yeah, they can send us some lunar dust, and then we can see if we can figure out how we're going to extract all that water and all that helium-3.
I wonder what also is the best option is whether lunar dust, presumably not too difficult to collect. We could scoop it relatively easily, bag it, ship it back to Earth. And then on Earth, you could do the extraction of the water from the dust. Or is it better to extract the water on the moon? Because that seems like a lot more infrastructure is needed.
Yeah, it's a lot more infrastructure, but it depends on what works out easier, because if you could extract the water directly, then you would have to transport less.
But then lunar dust is very light. But then how many molecules are you getting per gram of dust?
Yeah, exactly. You may need to transport lots of lunar dust just to get a small quantity of water. I think it was NASA did publish something about water on the moon and how much there is. So yeah, the 2020 there was the Sophia mission, and it revealed that in one of the craters on the moon there exists water in concentrations equivalent to around 12 ounces.
Wow.
Within a cubic meter of soil.
Okay.
Which is 12 ounces is not a lot, but
it's not nothing.
It's not nothing, yeah.
Very, very interesting. Cool. So I think that might be a good place to leave it. We've covered everything from what we could get from the moon, how we could get there, potentially even if we'd get sued going up there in the first place, and the massive amounts of money, time and resources that it would take to establish a successful moon mining operation. But it doesn't feel impossible to me. It does feel like something that could be done, and maybe even we could branch out into things like asteroids, moons of other planets, or even start mining diamonds from Neptune and Saturn instead. If you've enjoyed this episode, then drop us a like, and we'll see you next time.
The views expressed in this podcast belong entirely to the person that said them. They do not represent any industry or organisation. If you enjoyed listening to these views, it would really help us out if you could rate us, leave a review and tell a friend. This podcast was sponsored by no one, but if you're interested in funding us to continue to have frank discussions about science and engineering, please get in touch.